Hello, I'm Reg Watson, military historian and author, and I'm here to present an Anzac address. On the 25th of April 1915, Australian troops, together with New Zealand, went ashore at Gallipoli in Turkey. Overall, 1 million men worldwide fought at Gallipoli. Not only Australians and New Zealanders, but the British, South Africans, Indians, French, and of course the Turks. It was a gruelling campaign. More than 8,300 Australians were killed or died of disease or were from wounds. One can imagine those who were wounded as well. The number must have been triple as the official figures. The campaign was somewhat of a disaster, and towards the end of the year the orders came through to evacuate. So the Australians, having to endure the terrible conditions at Gallipoli and the terrible fatalities, were moved to Egypt and to the Middle East. There they repaired, retrained, and also were training to go to the Western Front, the terrible carnage that was to happen there. But it's interesting to note, we all think that Gallipoli was the first casualty place for Australian troops, but no, that's not the case. We know, of course, that the war started in August 1914. At that time, Germany had control of New Guinea, right to the north of Australia, and their presence there was seen, obviously, as a bit of a threat. They had, of course, a number of signal stations, wireless stations, so it was considered that they should be taken by our troops and destroyed. So a military operation from Australia, mainly a naval one, first of all went to New Guinea, and there we lost troops. So the first casualties for Australia was actually New Guinea and not Gallipoli. But having said that, that does not highlight the importance of Gallipoli and why we celebrate, if celebrate is a word we can use. I'd like to mention a Tasmanian. Harry Hodgman was his name. Poor old Harry, well, when he wasn't old, he was very young, had the sad distinction of being the first Tasmanian to be killed at Gallipoli, possibly the first Australian. Harry was coming ashore, being rowed ashore on that fateful morning, 25th of April 1915, when a Turkish sniper took out his young life. So therefore Harry was the first Tasmanian, as I said, possibly the first Australian to die at Gallipoli. But I'd like to mention someone else who was at Gallipoli too, another Tasmanian, who was born at Ouse, Tasmania. Her name was Elizabeth Orr, Nurse Orr, or Sister Elizabeth Lizzie Orr, later become matron. Her story is absolutely fantastic. Her dedication to her fellow man and to her profession was absolutely enormous. She was in charge of all those hospital ships that were taking the Gallipoli veterans and wounded. An enormous responsibility, a successful responsibility which she shouldered. But it wasn't her first military experience. A dozen years before, she was in South Africa during the Boer War, looking after Australian and Tasmanian soldiers. And like all nurses at the time, she went there to South Africa at their own expense, having no government subsidies to pay their way. An incredible lady, and I have written substantially on Elizabeth Orr. Another fellow I'd like to mention, another Tasmanian, born close to Elizabeth Orr. He was born at Hamilton, General Sir John Gellibrand, an incredible man, a very humane man. And Sir John was the highest ranking Tasmanian soldier in World War I. Sir John was a controversial fellow. He seemed to clash with everyone where he went. But as I said, he was a very humane man. And after the war, he was concerned not only with the returning servicemen, but he was concerned about the widows. He was concerned about the families. And as a result, he started what became known as the Remembrance Club. Now, the Remembrance Club became, in turn, Legacy, an Australian-wide organisation that still helps veterans, family and their widows. A great Tasmanian. And of course, from Gallipoli, our troops, as I said, went to the Middle East. Many of them joined the light Australian horse that fought the Turks in appalling condition, but the majority, of course, went to the Western Front, France and Belgium. And there the carnage was incredible. We fought in many, many battles, many skirmishes. But the overall sacrifice of Australians in World War I was 60,000. Now we're talking about a country less than 5 million. And if we look at the country, 50% were female. A number of them were men who could not go for whatever reasons, or elderly. And we're looking at boys. So the sacrifice of 60,000 was incredible, and that's not counting those who were wounded. And we can say 60,000 died, another 180,000 were wounded. So a casualty rate, adding them two together, is 250,000. So you can understand the sacrifice that Australia went through during World War I. And during courses of France, another Tasmanian from Evandale, Harry Murray, won his VC, 1 out of 11 Tasmanians who won in World War I. Harry Murray is an incredible man. There's a statue at Evandale in his memory. But the thing about Harry Murray, he ended up being the highest decorated soldier in the British Empire, a Tasmanian. Something should be highlighted and known. So we can look at the statistics, the terrible sacrifice that Australia and Tasmania, because 3,000 Tasmanians died in World War I. And again, with the casualty rates, 3 times as much at least, and another 9,000, 12,000 out of a population of less than 200,000 on a statewide basis. And Tasmania won 11 VCs during World War I. Again, an incredible situation. We know, of course, World War I finished on the 11th hour in November 1918. And the following year, 1919, the Treaty of Versailles was signed, officially ending the war. And everyone was happy, great celebrations throughout the world, including our own Tasmania, in every little hamlet. And afterwards, of course, a memorial such as behind me was erected in every little district, every little hamlet, village, town, and every city. Dozens and dozens of them to herald our sacrifice in World War I. But sadly, just 20 years later, there was to be a repeat. On the 3rd of September 1939, World War II exploded on the world. And Australians served in every theatre of the war. Every theatre, Army, Navy and Air Force. And the sacrifice was made again. Plus those poor women and men who survived under terrible conditions as a POW under the Japanese. Here behind, at ANZAC Park, Lindisfarne, we have a memorial which was erected in the 1920s. At the reverse of this memorial, we have a list of all those confrontations and wars that Australia partook in, starting from the Boer War and of course the 2 World Wars. Then we followed by the Korean War. And in between that and the Vietnam War, we had the Malayan campaign, the Indonesian confrontation, and as I said, the Vietnam War, finishing with the war that still was with us, Afghanistan. And in this park, just over here to my right, is a very small little mini park, but very tastefully done, beautifully done. And it's in memory of those Tasmanians who died in Vietnam. And further up, we have a park for the Australian Navy, Australian Royal Navy, regarding those who served in the Royal Australian Navy during World War II. So summing up, in all our confrontations, in all our wars, there's been horrendous casualties, great sacrifice. And we mustn't forget, those that returned, every one of them, 100% from whatever war, do have to deal with this situation that they had been in psychologically. Every man had to deal with that, even though they may have came back looking okay without any foreseen casualties on their body. But psychologically, they had been affected. Now, they went for our freedom, to fight for our freedom, to sacrifice. The RSL, if I have a good memory, has a motto, eternal vigilance. And that's what we must do. Freedom has come at a cost. Freedom is not given to us, it has to be won, it has to be earned. And not only on the battlefield, but through the corridors of power. The freedom that we have enjoyed goes back thousands of years. It's an evolution. And even though we have not any great wars at the moment outside Afghanistan, and it's a very unstable world, within our own society, we, the people, must protect those freedoms that have been passed on to us at the sacrifice of those who went before. We must be eternally vigilant to preserve and protect and promote those freedoms. Overall, 100 Australians were recipients of the Victoria Cross, the greatest award that any soldier can obtain. I'd like to mention, of that 100, there were 14 Tasmanians. Now, in my calculations, that's 14%. When you consider that Tasmania is only 2.5% of the national population, and that has been consistent since Federation, we have tripled our effort in World War I, World War II, and all those other wars that we have fought in. We have gone beyond our contribution to what it should have been or could have been. So on these particular days of Anzac and later on Remembrance Day, let us reflect on the sacrifice of those who went before us. It could have been our father, it could have been our grandfather, but our ancestors or friends or whoever. It doesn't have to be related. But let's remember their sacrifice, their preparedness to go and do the job that the country called them to do. So let's reflect, let's remember, and let us ponder, and let us appreciate their efforts. Thank you for listening, and may I say, lest we forget.